Welcome back. This is the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato, getting ready for Memorial Day weekend over here. Always a fun weekend, my birthday weekend. Not that I'm a big birthday guy. I really don't care. And I will say this, I stole this from my friend Brett Child, but I stand by it, and I'm using this, and I've told it to my parents since. If you ever sing the birthday song to me, Nick, at a restaurant, because we're going out for dinner, my family and I and my brother and his girlfriend, Kara. And if you ever sing the birthday song to me at my birthday dinner or any dinner that's surrounded around my birthday, I will get up and I will walk out. So they know what the deal is. I do not want that stupid song sung to me. Terrible song, terrible moment. I don't want the attention. And Nick, do you remember the episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David was at Ben Stiller's birthday party and he was the only one in the room who refused to sing the birthday song? And Ben Stiller gives him that look like, what the hell, man? Why are you not singing this song? And I'm with Larry, man, because screw that song. It's a stupid song. Just don't want it. I don't want it at all. So, you know what? If you want to sing it to me in a different language or something, that might be somewhat interesting. And you change the tune up a little bit, but happy birthday to you. Just don't ever do it.
It's one of those songs that gets sung to you, and it's almost like a shameful thing as a man to sit there and hear. At least for me, like I'm like, all right, like if I get up, it's a whole scene. And I don't want to cause the scene, so I just kind of sit there and I take the song in stride, and then I'm just like, all right, let's everyone shut up so everyone else can eat cake, and I can sit here and have my salad.
Yeah, exactly right, Nick. But yeah, so I'll be celebrating the birthday this weekend with some family and some friends, but excited for that. Excited just for this time of year is always nice as we head into May, at least for me, Nick. I'm going to be honest, because these next 2 months are basically the only time of the year where I'm not working that hard, like as hard as usual. I shouldn't say that hard. There's still some things to do on the CBS front. But for the Giants, like we're going to recap OTAs today. And this was a week of OTAs. They did 2 practices earlier this week. And then today's practice was the first one the media had access to. Nick and I are not at these practices. That'll most likely remain the case throughout the offseason, but we will see. I typically don't have opportunities to go to practice based on the schedule and the timing of them because I have to do work for CBS Sports and I'm on, and that comes first. And Nick is on the other side of the country. So he, at least for now, so he might not be there either, but we're going to try to get to a few. We'll try to get to the Fan Fest. But either way, just to give this, I wanted to bring this up at the beginning of the show, Nick, just so people are well aware of the fact that we are, utilizing the beat writers for these reports. So I will be giving them credit throughout the show. I have it all listed in my notes. So who said what as far as the beat writers go? I have over the years, Nick, come to learn that some of these beat writers are more fluff than others. Let's leave it at that. So I know which ones I believe a little bit more than others when it comes to this guy's amazing today in these shorts and shell practices with no pass rush and things of that nature. But they're fun to talk about. So we're going to talk about them today. For those of you who have been waiting for content, just know that this time of the year is a little bit more dead. We're not fully in the dead time yet, but we're close. And we're going to try to spice it up this dead time. Me and Nick spent some time the last 2 days brainstorming ideas, coming up with things that'll be fun to do. Not going to give them all away right now, but some of the fun things we're going to do, one that I'm looking forward to most, which we'll probably do next week or the week after, when it really gets dead and OTAs aren't even here, are Nick and I are going to expansion draft the Giants roster from scratch. So the assumption will be that we are 2 expansion teams. We need to draft players from the Giants roster, similar to when we drafted the 2023 NFL draft and Nick game theoried me to get both Jalen Carter and Will Anderson. I will be game theorying him in this one. I have already decided I'm going to get back on the game theory. So we'll have that. We're also going to recap OTAs as they roll through. So I believe I put this down. Yeah, here we go. Here are some important dates just to look forward to. So today was the media access for the 3rd OTA, May 25th. Then we're going to have May 30 through 31, another set of OTAs, 4th and 5th. That is next week. And both of those will have media access. So we will recap those at the end of next week. OTA number 6 is June 2nd. Then June 5th through 6th is OTA number 7 and 8. June 8th through 9 is OTAs number 9, which has media access, and 10. So media access days are 9, 4, 5, and today's was 3. And then the thing that I think is actually a lot more interesting than the rest, which is the mandatory minicamp, the 13th through 15th of July, which I think you get a little bit more out of there, Nick. So that was a long intro, but I wanted to give some important dates and give a look ahead to what's going on. Nick, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing excellent, man. Just chilling out here in Arizona. Missing you, though, Dan. Dan came out here. We had a good time. What was that, last week? About a week and a half ago, Dan came out.
Yeah.
Stayed with us for a couple days before heading to Vegas to be a degenerate. So it was a lot of fun.
This is true. This is true. I like it out west, man. I could easily see myself living out there in a different life or at some point in this life. Who knows? But today we're here to talk about the Giants. We're here to talk about this third OTA practice, the one that was open to the public. But before we do that, I want to talk about something interesting that came out of today's OTAs from reporter Dan Duggan. And I'm going to try my best to credit everyone, but the majority of the credit belongs to Dan Duggan, Tom Rock, Pat Traina, and Ryan Dunleavy. These are where most of what we will be talking about today is coming from. And Giant Insider had some stuff too. So preseason schedule is set, and I thought this was interesting, Nick. The Giants are doing joint practices this year. They're going to do joint practice with the Lions before the Lions preseason game. And then before the Jets preseason game, they'll do a single joint session. So I was excited to see that. I feel like you get a little bit of an edge when you do these joint practice sessions.
I'm a fan of the joint practices. It's interesting though with the Jets because the Giants play the Jets this year, so they'll get that in-depth look at the team. And I'm also curious, man. There's going to be fights throughout these joint practices. Who is going to be the player involved in the fights? Because earlier I would say Dexter Lawrence, but now Dexter Lawrence is at this level where I'm like, yo, he's so good. I don't know if anybody's going to be messing with him. So who's that player who's going to get in the fights on the Giants defense? Because it's got to be a Giants defender.
Good question. I actually hope it's John Michael Schmitz on the other side of the ball. I want to see a little mean streak going against Quinn and Williams. And then whoever Detroit has to throw out there, Lee McNeil, whoever's on that going up against him there. I would like to see on the defense side of the ball, or not like to see. My guess is going to be Nacho. I think Nacho is going to be that dude who gets in a fight and gets everybody riled up, has Giants Twitter going nuts, has people, doing crazy things on Giants Twitter because of the fight, getting all amped up, getting the raw emotional side of it. So that's my guess right there.
I like the nacho call. A little spicy cheese there, bro.
Exactly. All right. So those are what's going to happen joint practice wise. Let's talk about some of the biggest takeaways from this final OTA practice that was open to the media. And I want to start with the first one that stood out to me, Nick, more than the other. John Michael Schmitz, Giants second round pick, working with the first team offense already. Andrew Thomas said after practice that John Michael Schmitz has done a really good job so far. He said there's a lot to learn in the offense. But Thomas said, I'm teaching him to be confident in his calls, and I'm already seeing him being a lot more confident in his calls. I thought this was interesting, Nick, because yes, I understand that there's not a lot of competition at center right now. Ben Bredesen took some snaps with Daniel Jones in the offseason when they trained in Arizona. There's not too many other options to potentially compete at center. But I'm thinking about this through my career of doing this, Nick. There's been very few times I can remember. And I'm talking about players who were drafted a lot higher than John Michael Schmitz, where the first practice of OTA, the first one we see, this player is lining up the ones. Usually, even with like Trevor Lawrence and stuff, you'll see like, they'll give like a week to the backup to the other quarterback. Like, yeah, no, we're just a competition. We're gonna see. But then like after a week, it's like, all right, he's in the first team lineup, and that's okay. It's like 10 days, 14 days. This is like 0 days. Like he's hit the ground running. John Michael Schmitz is the starting center, and I don't really see too many avenues ahead of us where he's going to relent. Like that job is probably his from this point on. I think it's only going to go up from here as far as where he goes as a player. And the fact of the matter is, with this first team offense, Nick, Ben Bredesen was working as the starting left guard, the other player who was considered to potentially be the starting center because Josh Azudu is not fully back from his injury yet. And so maybe it's injury based. I don't know, but I thought it was really interesting to see JMS with the ones.
I wish Brian Daboll during his pre-practice press conference alluded to who was actually like off to the side. He said there were a lot of players off to the side working. I'm imagining Azudu was one of them. I won't read too much into Ben Bredesen being the starting left guard, but even if they were both fully healthy, Dan, would you be surprised if Ben Bredesen was starting over Josh Azudu? I would not be.
I would not be at all. I think there's a case to be made, honestly, Nick, and we're very excited about Josh Azudu here. We see the floor, ceiling, Nick and I, and we're excited about the ceiling. We have a lot of really good reps in our memory from Azudu. Like I think about the Jaguar. My favorite play from him last season was against the Jaguars. And I feel like all of those reps that come to my mind, Nick, are all in the run game with Azudu so far. And that's great. But if they're going to start him at left guard over Ben Bredesen, he's going to have to be in their mind, a lot more short in the passing game. And I feel like that's going to be the key here with Azudu, especially since he has this late start to competing for this job since he's off to the side right now. So I think that's going to be a much more interesting battle, like you said, than people are realizing that there is a chance that Ben Bredesen can start. He was consistent last year, more consistent than he's been at any point in his career. And I feel like if Josh Azudu can get to that point. He can get consistent as well. But if he's not showing consistency, specifically in the passing game, it would not shock me if they're just like, we got to go with Bredesen here. He's the one who we can trust more to do what's more important here, which is pass protect. The run blocking is great. It's important, especially to this team. This team was big on the run game last year. But if they want to evolve the offense like they expect they will, and like they're trying to, which means pass first, pass protection is number one.
And Ben Bredesen's only 25 years old. And I also think we have to acknowledge this. Last year, the Giants recycled that left guard position. They had John Feliciano, who is a guard and a center, but a veteran type of player. I'm wondering if the Giants are going to be comfortable enough in John Michael Schmitz to also do that, to rotate the guards if one of them is playing well and then the next week the other one is playing well, depending on the practice. I think they will be. I mean, everything that we hear about John Michael Schmitz is he's very heady. He's a very smart player. And the fact that he is starting right now, that's something that it's OTAs. OTA practice one. It's May, as Brian Daboll would say, not so much to read into. But we've seen so many coaching staffs, Dan, around the NFL do exactly what you were alluding to before with Trevor Lawrence. It's like, oh, yeah, Gardner Minshew is going to be the starter. He has to earn the job. It's like, yeah, bullshit. We all knew John Michael Schmitz was going to start over the J.C. Hassenauers of the world. But this coaching staff doesn't really play those games. I really feel like this is very merit-based. And they're not like, hey, you're a veteran. You're going to start for the first week of OTAs. No, they're going to be like, you're going to be the starter. We trust you to make these calls, get these early reps in. Let's build you up to be the starting center and not play these games just because you're not a veteran. And I appreciate that about the Giants' current staff.
Yeah, I think that's a great point here because they're just trying. It's simply put, it's the best player will play. And with John Michael Schmitz, I just have a good feeling that he's not, there's like no, look, ceiling is one thing with JMS. We'll see where he can get to in his career as a ceiling type player. But as far as the floor goes, like he's already so much further along from the mental side. Like obviously Andrew Thomas talked about it, and we all know about the pre-draft meeting he had with Bobby Johnson, which played, I think, a big role in why the Giants were so keen on drafting him to the point where they were even considering him in round one if things fell a certain way. And a big part of it was in that meeting, they felt like John Michael Schmitz can hit the ground running from a mental standpoint, which is to them insanely important. And I get it. Look, if you want this guy to play with the ones from the start of OTAs and then make it through preseason with the ones and not make mistakes, he needs to be there from a mental standpoint. The physical stuff is obviously more important long-term, but in the short term, they needed a guy who can make all the calls right now for what they want to do on offense and who can get on the same page with Daniel Jones as fast as possible if they wanted that player to start in week one.
And I don't think this situation is as indicative about the coaching staff's overall philosophy as it is what Bryce Ford Wheaton said when he came to the New York Giants, why he chose the New York Giants, not just because of the money, but he was a highly sought after undrafted free agent. But he saw last year what Brian Daboll and this staff did. They had a $72 million contract wide receiver on their roster that they didn't play because he was not living up to the bill. And they played instead the David Sills of the world. This is a meritocracy here with the New York Giants. And that's going to attract players like the Bryce Ford Wheatons or the veteran free agents who want one last chance to make an impression. I think just that nature, that culture is something that you want to cultivate if you're a head coach. And we already have it after 1 year.
I think that's a great point with the Golladay situation. You nailed it right there, Nick. It's like, how many teams would you have seen in that same situation, especially with a new coach who's like, I don't want to alienate players. Like, this guy's a $72 million dude. Like, he obviously has expectations about what his role is and what it should be. I don't want to alienate players. I'm a new coach. You could see so many times the coaches will fall into that trap of just playing Golladay, giving him all the snaps and just being like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. But there is no supposed to do with Daboll. It's just like you said, it's a meritocracy. Like, you will get on the field if in practice you show the coaches that you should be on the field. And so John Michael Schmitz has shown the coaches so far that he should be with the ones. And that's most likely in my mind based on what he's done from the mental side of things. Obviously, there's not much physical yet to talk about. Even in OTAs, he's snapping the football, but that's basically all he's doing as a center right now. But even to get to this point, he's obviously had to show the coaches, like from the mental side, he's picked things up super fast. And that's exciting for me because I think that he can potentially give them an edge on the offensive line this year if all things go right. It's hard to say that about rookie centers, but we have seen some cases where this has been true. Creed Humphrey, obviously the best example from the Chiefs recently. We shouldn't expect that to happen, but the impact he made in year one for the Chiefs was unbelievable. And if John Michael Schmitz can make 75, 80% of that kind of impact, it's going to be a big boost for the Giants offensive line.
Speaking of John Michael Schmitz, he's dead snapping the football, which is something I've seen going around Twitter, which is just a different way to snap the football rather than the normal way. Instead of having your hand kind of wrapped around the horizontal portion of the ball with it somewhat flat on the ground, you kind of stick your hand on the top with the nose of the football in the dirt. And I think it gives you maybe like a better angle to shoot it back towards Daniel Jones. Now, a lot of people kind of bitch about that type of snap because it's not as tight. It's not like a tight spiral. It's kind of just going back into Daniel Jones. It's not really as spiraled because you don't really get that spin on it. And there's a little bit more air resistance that the ball needs to travel through. But this is something that John Michael Schmitz did in college. And as long, for me at least, as that ball is accurate and Daniel Jones has no problem with it, which Daniel Jones said after practice, then I'm completely fine with it. But I just saw it floating around Twitter and I figured, hell, why not bring it up now that we're talking about John Michael Schmitz? I didn't think we'd be talking about how he snapped the football, but here we are.
And this is a stupid thing to say too, because we are on this topic of this conversation, but I feel like Daniel Jones being a better athlete than the average quarterback by a good margin. Like if you really think about Daniel Jones as an athlete, you look at some of the testing at the combine, the 3-cone specifically, and then you just see him in the open space, his ability to change direction. Obviously the long speed's one thing, but I'm just mostly talking about the lateral agility. He is a clearly better athlete than the vast majority of quarterback in the NFL right now. So I feel like just maybe that gives him an edge to catch a football that's not a perfect spiral. And maybe there is a little bit of an edge from this style of snapping in the sense of, like you said, it could get there quicker. The ball could get there quicker, which maybe gives a half tick second more. I don't know. Either way, what I'm more concerned on is Daniel Jones comfortable with this? Is this going to lead to any bad snaps, fumbled snaps from Jones, mishandled snaps? If we don't see any of that anytime soon in the preseason, whatever, and he sticks with this technique, there's nothing to worry about. I think we're good to go there.
Of course. And as long as John Michael Schmitz can just fire the ball and then get his hands up to make contact and initiate contact, whatever's comfortable for him as well. Like, I don't know if you really want to be switching the snaps if it's working. If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, because if you switch the snaps and it's working just to like get quote unquote what the norm does or whatever, then you're potentially screwing yourself over if, like you said, it screws up his whole flow and he can't get his hands up and he's not into his stance fast enough and he doesn't feel comfortable, which is the most important thing. So until we see issues with Daniel Jones catching the snaps, whatever, then there's no reason to panic there. I think one thing I want to circle back to real quick before we move to the next thing is the competition at left guard. I think this could be one of the most fun training camp battles we have, Nick, moving forward into this season. Ben Bredeson versus Josh Ezeudu, especially if Bredeson gets the head start like it looks like he might get, because everyone looks at this and they're like, oh, the Giants invested this really premium, quote unquote premium. I would say it's second tier premium when you get to the Ezeudu type of overall pick, but on Josh Ezeudu and what they do with Ben Bredeson, it was a pass regime. They traded a 4th round pick for him. But I think the point you made was really important. Ben Bredeson's only 25 years old, and he had a pretty good profile coming out. Like, we liked watching him on tape, and we saw some interesting things. And then you look at last year, and I remember just going back to our film podcast, Nick, when we did the film reviews week after week during Bredeson's healthy stretch, and we really liked what we saw from Bredeson. There were even times where we talked about it in those podcast recaps where, like, Bredeson was one of the best players on the field on the offensive line that game. Obviously, Andrew Thomas not included ever in that discussion because he's always, like, every week he just won that award for us. But I'm really intrigued by Bredeson potentially being, like, looking across this line, there is a non-zero chance that Bredeson is their second best offensive lineman from a consistency standpoint, from what he can do technique-wise, and from what he can offer you on a week-to-week basis. Because we don't know if Evan Neal is going to be consistent this year. We want him to be. We don't know. Mark Lewinsky, we don't know if he's going to be consistent this year. John Michael Schmitz, great pick, great center. We're talking about how well he's come along from a mental standpoint, but he's a rookie player playing in the NFL. Like, there's not a guarantee he's going to be consistent. I feel like Ben Bredeson might offer them some kind of consistency that they really only have with Andrew Thomas.
It's kind of weird too, man, because I look at the Ben Bredeson, the thing you just posited, right? If Ben Bredeson is the second best offensive lineman on this offensive line, you can view that as a win, right? Oh, he developed to the point where now the left side of your line is that solid. That's excellent. But at the same time, Evan Neal, John Michael Schmitz, and the right guard, look, Mark Lewinsky's here, whatever. He's not going to be here that long. If those guys don't develop, like, that says something about them. And also Josh Ezeudu, right? Like, if Ben Bredeson,
it's a net loss for the Giants because
it's a net loss for the Giants.
And Neal have much higher ceiling. So if they don't develop into that, and we're just talking about the floor of Bredeson, you're right. That's a net loss. That's a net loss.
That would not be great. Now, unless Ben Bredeson just out of nowhere just becomes a really dominant Quentin Nelson type of guard, and then Evan Neal and Josh Ezeudu incrementally just get better, that's a win. But I feel like that's much less likely.
But I almost, that's all true when we're talking ceilings and floors. But I do wonder if he displays, at least in training camp, like the OTAs doesn't matter to these coaches, but in training camp and in preseason, if Ben Bredeson puts some consistent film out there, and we still see a lot of mistakes early from Ezeudu, working back from injury, from Neal, obviously, still needs to get over the hump. And not that Neal, he's competing for the same position, but you might just look at it like, I want to get some consistency on my offensive line, and let's just put Bredeson in there. So I'm intrigued by that, and I'm happy to see that he's fully healthy right now and taking those snaps to the first team.
One other thing that we should have probably mentioned at the top of the show was who wasn't at voluntary OTAs. Obviously, Saquon Barkley wasn't there, and neither was either of the star defensive linemen that the Giants have, Dexter Lawrence or Leonard Williams. Not that big of a deal, but it's something that we should also acknowledge. This is voluntary OTAs.
Yep, definitely something we should acknowledge. As long as we're on the acknowledgments, I'm going to also throw out there was a payday for some of these Giants, which is fun. Signing bonuses came out and were paid out in installments today. So here are some people who got some checks from the Giants today, which must be nice, by the way. Like they're pro football players, Nick, but it's fun just to look at these numbers and be like, damn, imagine if I was, imagine if you were in this position and today someone handed you a check for $4.5 million, like Daniel Jones just got today, right? Like, or how about like 4.54 for Dexter Lawrence, who wasn't even there. It doesn't matter. He's still getting the check. 2.5 for Bobby Okereke. So definitely a good day for those guys. They're all getting paid. I want to talk about a few other things that stood out, but I'm going to do it in kind of order of interest. And so second most important thing, and this probably should have been the first order of interest, but I led with John Michael Schmitz. It's Darren Waller, first-year Giant tight end they traded for. They traded the pick that they got for Kadarius Toney, one of the picks they got for Kadarius Toney, to get Darren Waller. And let's just call a spade a spade. It's early OTAs, Nick, but Darren Waller's done literally everything right so far. So he has got Brian Daboll calling him a true pro who's been great in the meeting rooms, showing early leadership skills. So you start with that. Then you also have Daniel Jones, who's talking about how impressed he's been with him. He said he's really fun to work with. Some people are listed at 6'6", but he's a true 6'6", and that helps me. He said Waller's put an incredible amount of effort into learning this system. Off the field, Jones said that Waller is a deep thinking guy, quote unquote, extremely humble, authentic, and values the relationships that he's building. So before we talk about what he's doing so far on the field, I want to talk a little bit about off the field, Nick, because we spent a lot of time last year discussing how intricate this offense was with obviously option routes involved, and to the point where we even saw last year some players really benefited from it. David Sills played a lot early because of how well he knew the offense and because of the rapport he built with Daniel Jones. Kadarius Toney did not play a lot often before he was traded because maybe he didn't pick up the system. We don't know if that's true. There's no confirmation, but we did see him run a couple routes, or one route that led to an offensive pass interference where he ran the same crossing route at the same exact depth as another receiver, ran into a D-back and got an offensive pass interference to bring back like a big play. So I feel like in this offense, it's more important than ever to have this type of situation where off the field, you got the coach and you got the quarterback talking about how fast this receiver, I'm going to call him a receiver for today, tight end, whatever you want to call him, is picking up this intricate offense.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by it, though. Darren Waller, ever since he's returned from all of the obstacles that he had to overcome earlier in his career, has been nothing but a consummate professional. And as we've said, when the Giants traded for him, if this guy stays healthy, this guy is going to be an elite weapon for Daniel Jones, a weapon that Daniel Jones has not had yet throughout his entire professional career and his college career, frankly. So looking at the marriage between Daniel Jones, Darren Waller, Brian Daboll, it's something that really gets me excited. And we saw Daniel Bellinger, a rookie tight end, which you don't see all that often, be used wildly creatively all throughout last season in the red zone. Now you add Darren Waller, who's a different type of athlete. We like Bellinger, but Darren Waller is a different type of athlete. It's something that I'm really excited to see, to say the least.
I really feel like, and I don't want to get too bullish on this. I don't always get bullish on players, Nick. I feel like I'm probably more of the opposite side of it, but we'll go into like the fantasy side of this at some point down the line. But if this dude stays healthy, I think he's going to have a super productive year for all of the reasons you just said. Number one, the creativity in the red zone, how the Giants have already proven they can use these types of players at the tight end position. And then two, like Daniel Jones said, this is a true 6'6" player, right? Like this is not 6'6" on paper. This dude is long and presents a massive target for Daniel Jones, as we saw in today's practice, because Jones connected with him on two deep balls to Darren Waller, one down the right sideline, and then I'm not sure where the other one was. But again, 7-on-7, so let's pump the brakes a little bit on the importance of it. But it's good to see that rapport building early, and Darren Waller offers them some. Now, the question I'll have, and this is really the only thing when it comes to Waller, because I feel like we don't have to look at him like a prospect, Nick, where it's not like we're like, can he develop into a blocker? It's like, no. He's not a blocker. He's a veteran player in the NFL right now. I'm not looking deeply into his blocking and if it can improve. I'm hoping he's an effort blocker like Evan Ingram was, but I don't really think he has the frame to ever like evolve into anything as a positively as a blocker. But if you just take that away, you don't worry yourself with that concern, like on the football field. The only real concern is these tight hamstrings. And like, are these hamstrings a problem? People say like, once you start getting hamstring injuries, it's hard to get over them. They keep popping up. But I feel like outside of that, I feel really comfortable and confident with what he can bring to this offense this year.
That catch he made up the right sideline was against Darnay Holmes. And that's something that you got to look at, man. There are smaller slots and nickels all throughout the NFL. And you have a very smart coaching staff, Mike Kafka and Brian Daboll. They are going to scheme to try to create that matchup. And you have a 6'6", a true 6'6" receiver. And Daniel Jones is well aware of that, who is going to target and exploit those matchups.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nick, because we see this one against Darnay Holmes. Darnay Holmes not even 6 foot against a 6'6" guy. They're going to there's going to be teams that are going to have the personnel to match up like a safety against Waller at times.
Jerron Kearse for the Cowboys. That's where you got to start looking. Like they have Kearse. Kearse is going to see so much Darren Waller. Waller can win that matchup. Kearse is a very good player. Don't get me wrong, but Waller can win that matchup. But now that you remove Kearse from the middle of the field and you can put him on the backside against Darren Waller, that opens up the rest of the field. That opens up the running game. Just the presence of a healthy Darren Waller does so much for your offense. And he doesn't even have to catch the football. It still does so much just because how the defense has to play the Giants now that they have this guy.
You nailed that. That's really what it comes down to. His presence on the field takes away a defender that you would want to use elsewhere on someone else, or puts the team in a situation, the opposing team, I should say, where maybe they have somebody who's playing over the slot or a typical nickel like a Darnay Holmes, where just simply put, like Darnay Holmes cannot, no offense to Darnay Holmes, but like he's not going to win that matchup. He's going to lose that matchup a lot more times than he's going to win that matchup. And there will be teams the Giants faces here, especially as the war of attrition, builds in the NFL. There's going to be backup corners, backup slots, backup nickels trying to defend Darren Waller, so long as Darren Waller can stay healthy. And I think that's really what's going to lead to him being kind of one of these standout players that they've acquired this offseason, if not the most important player they acquired this offseason. According to Giant Insider Nick, Waller was running very crisp routes and was beating defenders left and right, not just on the deep passes. So I don't know how much weight to put on that, but definitely something interesting.
Yeah, we also had Tom Rock say that Daniel Jones threw more deep passes today, and 2 of them ended up going to Waller. I think you might have brought that up before. One of them was up the right sideline, so maybe that's a little redundant. But at the same time, Giants couldn't create explosive plays last year, Dan. We've said it so many times. It's to the point where I'm like, all right, Nick, shut the about this. But honestly, it's a huge part of having offensive success in the modern NFL. And I just think the Giants are going to air it out, especially off the play action. We saw in the first half of the season last year, the Giants were one of the more efficient teams off of play action. And that's one of the reasons why the Giants offense was able to have a lot of success early in the season before they started switching their offense a lot. Now with Darren Waller there, are you kidding me? That presents such a mismatch nightmare for the defense. And with Saquon Barkley, hopefully in the backfield running the ball, defenders are going to be paying attention to that as well.
Yeah, and you brought it up, how Tom Rock said, Giants reporter Tom Rock said, I've seen more deep balls thrown in today's OTA than I saw like all last offseason, the preseason. And it's like, yeah, that could just be that Daniel Jones is getting a lot more comfortable with this offense and understanding like where to get rid of the ball. We've said this a lot, you and I, Nick, and I think we both stand by this. If the deep ball is going to work this year, it's not going to be something where it's because they're trying it more or it's because they're like making these intentions to do it. There's always opportunities throughout the game. It's going to be on Daniel Jones to be quite frank about the situation and the receivers to get on the same page with him so they can get comfortable. And so he can, more importantly, he can get comfortable where they're going to be. But it's going to be on him in my mind, going to be on him getting rid of the football fast. Because vertical throws are not just throws where you see, it's not the old NFL, like not even the Gilbride days where it's like 7-step dropbacks and you get max protect and it's like hang in the pocket. Now something got open deep. It's basically just all about, do you understand where there's going to be open space on the field for a vertical shot? Is there a player running into that route? Is there a route that's eventually going to get into that space? And can you get the ball out into that space early, leading it into that space? And then you trust the receiver to run into that space. It's not you see it open deep, now I throw it. It's trust him run into that space. So during OTAs, we'll see what happens from that regard. And obviously, the pass rush is going to play a role in the real games. But if we start to hear reports like this, where it's like the ball's getting out fast and it's still getting on that vertical plane, despite it being thrown within 2 or 2.5 seconds from the quarterback, that's when I start to get excited because that means Jones is just seeing it. It's clicking for him and he's getting the ball out into space.
And the Giants added 3 players, Dan, who really fit that mold, who really fit into what you just said. They had Darius Slayton last year. They bring him back, but you bring in Paris Campbell, Jalen Hyatt, Darren Waller. all three of those players can do that successfully. One thing I am interested in, we don't got to spend a lot of time on this, but training camp. Do you remember training camp last year, just how much negativity there was around Daniel Jones because Wink Martindale was just dialing up the pressure in his first year to just get after him and just put a lot of pressure on him to see how he mentally responds? Because that's how the coaching staff didn't really know that much about Daniel Jones. They didn't pick up his fifth-year option. It's not like they were like, oh, this guy's our long-term future. He proved to be at least the long-term future in the short term, if that makes sense. But I'm wondering what training camp is going to be like this year for the New York Giants and for Daniel Jones. Is it going to be that same type of approach from the defense and from the head coach and from the coaching staff, or are they going to really just focus a little bit more on making everything a little bit more crisp for Daniel Jones and also trying to develop those long developing routes and see if Daniel Jones can become a more anticipatory thrower?
Yeah, that's a great point. We'll have to see that because, it's like, it's going to be a fun chess match because I think that the way this defense works, it's like there's no breaks. It's almost like we dictate the pace. We are the ones who want to dictate to you. So this is what we're throwing at you every day. But it's like a chess match too, right, Nick? Because if Daniel Jones, who's now had a full offseason to kind of see everything that Wink Martindale is going to throw at him in practice, he might start to take advantage of that and be like, I know based on what I see that the pressure is coming from here, or this is going to be potentially open based on this pressure or based on this look. And he could start to take advantage of that. And we could start to see some big practices where it's like Jones is ripping it through the air and he's beating Wink Martindale's defense. That's also within the realm of possibility as well, especially now that you have these weapons.
And then we could see it against the Lions and the Jets in those practices. And that's when you really start to get excited, right? He starts hitting on those plays in practice. And we might not even see it that much in the preseason game. I'm not even sure how much Daniel Jones will play. We start hearing about that from the people on the beat against the Jets, the Lions in practice. I mean, that's when I'm like, okay, hopefully we can carry that into the regular season.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of Waller, after practice, Xavier McKinney, who is apparently wearing the green dot, but so is Bobby Okereke. I think there's 2 green dots from what I've seen. There's conflicting reports on the green dot. And for obviously those who don't know, but I think most of you might, the green dot, that's basically the captain, the quarterback of the defense at that point. So he said that Darren Waller puts a lot of pressure on you as a defense because it's a challenge and you have to really be aware of where he is at all times. And you know what's funny when I think about that, Nick? I brought this point up because I think about that. I don't remember Xavier McKinney saying that about anyone on the Giants offense, obviously the exception of maybe Saquon Barkley at times. And really last year, you look at this roster and you're like, besides Barkley, of course, was there anyone on the Giants offense who defenses had to be aware of where they were at all times? And that's probably the answer. That's probably no. And then now that the answer is yes with Darren Waller, so long as he's healthy, that makes a big change too. You alluded to this earlier. Like if you have to be aware of where one player is at all times, that's going to lead to some kind of backlash or some kind of like miss on another end with another player or with another component of the opposing team's attack that is not getting accounted for the same way. And when you don't have to worry about that, you just play your defense and it's fine. And you're like, you go on with your day and it's a lot easier.
And it opens up other opportunities. That's where it becomes very important because you have this 3rd round pick named Jalen Hyatt who can do something very specialized. He has the speed to take the top off the defense, but you also have the same players that you had last year if some of them come back healthy, a la a Wan'Dale Robinson. So how much more space is Wan'Dale Robinson going to have when the defense is like, where is 26? Where is Darren Waller? We need to allocate a lot of our eyes in those directions. Maybe double team Darren Waller, maybe have an extra guy in the box for Saquon Barkley. But guess what? Now you have those other pieces that maybe the defenses weren't as worried about. We're going to have one-on-one matchups and have more space to operate for the Wan'Dale Robinsons, the Darius Slaytons, the Isaiah Hodgins of the world. So that's just another reason to get excited.
It is another reason to get excited. And Darius Slayton, by the way, according to Pat Traina, was a standout at practice. It was a crisp practice for Darius Slayton. Look, we've seen good Slayton, we've seen bad Slayton, but I'll say something about Slayton that a lot of these players just don't simply have on the Giants receiver corps, because I think he's at this point, viewed as maybe a back end guy by some fans or just someone who we're not really thinking about is even going to play. I think he is going to play this year, Nick. And I'll say this, he has a better rapport with the quarterback than anyone on this roster right now, by far, with the exception of maybe Sterling Shepard. But better than that, I think. He has still relatively young player, in my opinion, who can potentially work on his game and you can fix some of your issues if they're concentration related drops and things of that nature. And then 3, I mean, he knows this system so much better than some of these people he's running these routes against, right? Like Ferris Campbell learning the system from scratch, Jalen Hyatt learning the system from scratch. And so even Isaiah Hodgins came to the team mid-season last year, claimed off waivers, doesn't really know the system the same way Slayton does. So I think that's going to give him an edge specifically in these early training in OTAs and training camp practices, Nick. And I think we will see like more of these reports where it's like today it was Waller and Slayton who really stood out. And I don't think it's going to be a surprise to continue to see Slayton's name. And according to Giant Insider, Slayton caught 2 of the deep balls from Daniel Jones today.
Look, I know Darius Slayton can be frustrating sometimes. Like I've acknowledged it on this podcast, but his story, if we go back 1 year, I have so much respect for Darius Slayton. Nobody was counting on this guy. He took a pay cut to stay on the roster, and he still had an uphill chance to earn playing time. He was buried on the depth chart, and the only reason he was really inserted into the lineup was because the Giants just kept suffering injury after injury to the wide receiver position. And then once he got into the lineup, he performed. I mean, without Darius Slayton last year, where the hell was the explosive plays coming from in terms of passing the football? There weren't really much. There really weren't really much explosive plays out of Daniel Jones' hand that were not to Darius Slayton. So, man, I earned so much respect from Darius Slayton from what he was able to do, because last year at this time, nobody was counting on any production from him.
Right. And like I said, we've said before, and I've said before, when you watch the film, there's only one player on the entire Giants offense at the receiver position who any cornerback paid respect to in the sense of playing off the ball before the snap. And it was Darius Slayton. And that opens up space within an offense. And you need players who corners are going to have to respect and play off against, in my opinion, to have real chance of like opening up space in the field and getting your passing game to click. And so he's one of those players who, in my opinion, when he's on the field, like I said this before, Nick, and to me, an ideal scenario is Slayton has I guess I don't want to call it a breakout year, but sure, a breakout year for him for whatever that ceiling may be, because I still think he can get to a better point than he's shown. And Hyatt comes along fast, and both are on the field for a lot of snaps. Like that to me is ideal. If I've always been about getting speed on the field because I think it just opens up so much schematically. And so I would love to get both of those guys on the field at some point this season. We'll see what happens with that. Obviously, Jalen Hyatt has to come along as well, but we'll see what happens there. A few other notes before we wrap up here. Adoree Jackson was one of the 6 Giants punt returners at OTA today. So obviously that gives some bad flashbacks to myself and you. I think we're both still in the camp of no matter what, no scenario, we want Adoree Jackson returning punts.
Absolutely not. No, you have so many receivers that you brought in, some for special teams purposes. Some of them have to be able to field a punt. I know Eric Gray doesn't have the best track record doing it, but if he doesn't add value on special teams in other ways, put that guy back there and see if he can at least catch some of these balls. Don't put your starting number 1 cornerback out there to get hurt. We already have to learn this lesson, all right? That was, honestly, man, we love Brian Daboll, coach of the year last year. That's so freaking great. But I think a lot of Giant fans can agree. There's one huge glaring mistake, is oversight that he hasn't even admitted that he was wrong on, with putting Adoree Jackson back there.
He didn't admit it was wrong. He said he'd do it again, and he's doing it again right now. In OTAs, hopefully this doesn't translate to the regular season. We disagree with Brian Daboll on this. We 100% disagree with Brian Daboll on this. The Giants are just such a low ceiling special teams team, Nick. I feel like we're just like, at this point, we're just like, just get someone back there who can fair catch it, and that's it. We just don't want to fumble. It's like, this is
literally what they are.
Like, I just don't want to fumble. Like, what's going on here? Like, enough. I don't want, one thing I definitely don't want is an injury to the position. Like, we cannot afford an injury at. Like, we saw what happened when Adoree Jackson was out last year. It was not pretty for the Giants, and that was against a slew of meh quarterbacks. Like, there are a lot better quarterbacks on the schedule this year. And so, the Giants are going to have to really think about that one again. And hopefully, again, he was one of 6 people returning punts. So I that's a lot of people in the mix there. I doubt he's going to be the number 1 option. We hope, but that would be a big mistake for sure. One other thing, a couple other things I want to talk about before we wrap up here. Waller talked about how he felt like the Giants facility is such and this culture is such an empowering place. He says they value your opinions and ask players a lot of questions. It's actual partnership. So I don't know if that was more of a praise for the Giants or a shot at the Raiders organization, but it does feel good. And I've heard this in the past so many times about how players do feel like they are treated so much better here, and they have a lot more resources to work with here. And I think that will attract players to come here in the future.
Exactly. They're cultivating an environment that is very welcoming to new players. And I just think a lot of these players see what Brian Daboll did last year with a team that nobody picked to go to the playoffs. and they're like, hey, I want to go play for that guy because I feel like my voice is going to be heard and I'll have a chance at playing time if I practice and perform well.
And it's great to see that the Giants are on that. One final thing we'll wrap up here. Unfortunately, and this is scary because look, Nick, this could literally happen to any of the Giants players, which, I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, but it did happen today to a player who we're not really counting on making much of an impact.
Yeah.
But David Sills was injured today, and he left with an apparent rib injury after landing hard on a deep catch in practice, and he was, quote unquote, according to Dan Duggan, clearly in a lot of pain. And that could literally happen to anyone on the Giants. Could happen to Waller today if he lands bad on his rib, and now he might have some kind of rib injury. So just sucks to see. Hoping for the best for David Sills. Obviously, still a player who they believe is at least part of their off-season plan as sense of the summer plan, and we'll see where he can go from there. Had some decent snaps, I guess, last year, more so not maybe not the other side, but just sucks to see somebody injured at practice today.
Yeah, it's terrible. I know. Shout out to our guy Monty. I know he's the leader of the David Sills army. Hopefully he's doing all right.
Moving on to Bryce Ford Wheaton, though, hopefully, because that's going to be the exciting one.
The BFW. Jeez.
I have some excitement about Bryce Ford Wheaton. Well, we'll see. I'll get more excited as we get into August, but I got some excitement. Bryce Ford Wheaton. Got some excitement.
It's hard not to get excited about. Again, I don't know if the Giants are going to want to try to slip him through waivers. I think he'll get claimed if they attempt to do that. But really, is there a roster spot for him? He really needs to perform in training camp. I don't know how that situation is going to play out. But damn, if he can improve his route running and just stop at the frustrating hot potato drops. Because when he dropped the football at West Virginia, it wasn't just a drop. He threw it up in the air so a safety could catch it. It's like, what the you doing, bro? But damn, when you're that size and you're like 225 pounds and you can run that fast, even though I don't think he played to a 4.38, but even still, he's still fast. There's a lot to like there.
Even if he didn't play to a 4.38, if he was more like mid 4.4s at that size and that length, that's huge. Like that could give the Giants something that you literally don't have on this roster outside of Waller right now.
If you watch his highlights, you get really excited about it. But once you start diving into the nitty gritty, you're like, oh, I see why he was undrafted.
Yeah, you see why he went undrafted. Yep. All right, that's all we have for today. Recapping the Giants' third OTA practice. Keep it locked on Big Blue Banter. Like I said, we're going to start to do some fun stuff starting, in the month of June into July. We have a long way to go into training camp. That's what's really exciting. But we're going to do some fun stuff and hopefully bring on some guests. I know a lot of you tuned in while we did it and after the fact, because that was something I thought was interesting when I looked at YouTube. A lot of the views, I think almost double or half the views came after we recorded of our live Q&A that we did last week. We're going to do a lot more of these live Q&As moving forward. So keep an eye on Twitter for Nick and I, so you can kind of see when we're going to do these live Q&As, but more to come there. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.